everybody, welcome back to Premiere Thursday. And for those of you that aren't here on Thursday, welcome back to the channel. Tonight's story is called A Close Tongue. This is a story from Orkney, an archipelago of islands off the northeast coast of Scotland. Orkney is a unique place where the ancient past is never far away and is home to some of Scotland's most wonderful stories. Many of those stories concern the Finn folk. The Finn folk are a mysterious race of people who live on a hidden island called Hildeland in the summer before retiring to the undersea city of Finnfolkaheim in the winter. They are said to row boats with no sails and can row all the way to Iceland with 7 strokes of an oar. Their bodies are covered in fins, which they can disguise with the aid of magic, so they appear as tall, dark men. There once lived on the Isle of Sanday a man named Tam Scott. Tam had a friend, Willie, and the two of them worked together, running a ferry from Sanday to Kirkwall on the mainland. When the Arcadians say the mainland, they are referring to the main island in Orkney, not to Scotland, which some see as quite a separate country. Every year at Lammas, a fair was held at Kirkwall. People came from all over Orkney and as far away as Sutherland and Shetland to buy, sell and enjoy the festivities. Everybody had been looking forward to the fair for weeks, and finally the day had come. The sky was grey and a good wind was blowing as Tam and Willie ushered their passengers onto the ferry. They left the harbour and set off, the boat full of people laughing and joking, and Tam smiled and laughed as he steered the boat. They reached Kirkwall and docked in the harbour. Everybody rushed off the boat in the direction of St Magnus's Cathedral, where stalls would be set up and traders would be trading. "I'm not one for haggling with traders," said Willie to Tam. "I think I'll go and have a drink." "All right," said Tam. "I'll see you back at the boat, if not before." Tam wandered alone through the fair, chatting with acquaintances he met and catching up on the news. He was thinking of going for a cog of ale himself when someone tapped him on the shoulder. Tam turned around. Standing there was a tall, dark-haired, dark-eyed man. "You're Tam Scott?" asked the stranger. "Yes," said Tam. "Do I know you?" "You have a ferry?" asked the stranger. "I do, aye." "Good. I want to buy your services, Tam. I need to get to one of the North Isles. Can you do that?" "Of course," said Tam. It was still morning. His passengers wouldn't be returning to Sanday until the evening. "I'll need to fetch Willie. We'll meet you down at the dock." "Very well," said the stranger. Tam made his way to the Anchor, Willie's favourite watering hole. When he arrived, Willie wasn't inside the pub. He was outside it, lying in the gutter. Tam tried to wake him to no avail. Though Willie was a good seaman, he was over fond of ale, and nothing on earth could wake him when he passed out drunk. Cursing, Tam turned around and headed towards the harbour. He would just have to go without Willie, and hope he didn't run into trouble. Tam reached the harbour and looked about for the stranger. It wasn't hard to spot him. The stranger stood on the harbour with a cow at his side. The cow was blue as the summer sky. "Are you ready, Tam?" asked the stranger as Tam approached. "I'm ready, yes. It'll just be me," said Tam, trying not to stare at the cow. "Now, we'll need to load the cow onto the boat." Before Tam could say any more, the stranger put his arm beneath the cow's belly and hoisted it up onto his shoulder. He stepped onto the ferry and set it down. "Don't just stand there staring, Tam. Let's get moving." "Yes, of course," said Tam. He hopped in and tied the rope and rowed them out of the harbour. Out onto the open sea they went. Sails bobbed on the surface while gulls swooped overhead. "Is it Shapinsay you're going to?" asked Tam. "East of Shapinsay," said the stranger, not looking at Tam but out to sea. He must be going to Stronsay, Tam thought. He steered towards Stronsay, which was the next island east of Shapinsay. As they sailed along, Tam thought to make conversation to pass the time. He was very curious about the stranger and his blue cow. "That's some cow you've got there," he said. "I've never seen its like. How did you come by it?" The stranger turned and looked at Tam. "A close tongue keeps a safe heed," he said in a low voice. Tam shivered. He focused on the steering the boat. Soon it was time to steer towards Stronsay. "Are you going to Stronsay?" he asked. "East of Stronsay," said the stranger. "Sandy it is then," thought Tam. They sailed in silence, the stranger staring out to sea. Tam decided to try for conversation again. "Do you have family on Sandy? I'm from Sandy myself." The stranger fixed Tam with another icy glare. "A close tongue keeps a safe heed," he said. Tam shook his head and gave up on conversation. It was time to steer towards the harbour at Sandy. Tam began to turn his boat when the stranger said, east of Sandy. East of Sandy, said Tam. East of Sandy? I'm not going east of Sandy. Why, there isn't anything east of Sandy except open sea all the way to Norway, and my ferry wasn't made for crossing to Norway. Once more the stranger fixed his gaze on Tam. East of Sandy, he said. He said it quietly this time, in a way that made Tam wish he had never laid eyes on the stranger. Tam turned the ferry east. The sea grew rough and choppy, water sloshed onto the deck, and Tam was terrified. We need to turn around, said Tam. The stranger shook his head, still looking out east, seemingly unconcerned. As Tam watched, he raised his hand and waved it in the air while speaking a language Tam had never heard. A mist blew in. Tam couldn't see 3 feet in any direction. We're doomed, said Tam. Doomed! The stranger spoke strange words again. At once the sea calmed, the mist cleared. Tam couldn't believe his eyes. The sky was a brilliant blue. Beneath them the sea was a sheet of glass. Before them was an island, and it was the most beautiful island Tam had ever seen. Golden corn waved in the breeze on the hills, and the fields were dotted with herds of blue cows. The sand on the beach was as white as polished bone, the water surrounding it crystal clear. As Tam stared, he noticed women with fishtails sitting on rocks near the beach. Seeing Tam, they called out to him, slipped into the water, swimming towards him at a breathtaking speed. I'll need to blindfold you, Tam, said the stranger. This is not for your eyes to see. The stranger produced a strip of cloth from his pocket, and Tam allowed himself to be blindfolded. He understood now who the stranger was. He was a Finman, and the island was Hildeland, the legendary vanishing island of the Finn folk. Tam heard sweet singing around him as the mermaids emerged from the water. They invited him to join them in the water and to kiss them. There'll be none of that, shouted the Finman. He's a wife and children back on Sandy. The mermaids hissed, snarled and shrieked at Tam before swimming away. Tam sat still as the Finman guided the boat into the harbour. He felt the boat rock as the stranger lifted the cow out onto the shore. Now then, Tam, said the Finman, you've done a good job, and here's your payment. He put a heavy bag into Tam's hand. I'll turn around the boat now. When you feel the wind blowing, take off your blindfold, but not before. Tam nodded. He felt the stranger climb out of the boat, turn it around and push it off. Tam's ferry floated out to sea. He shivered as the air cooled, and when the wind began to blow, he took off his blindfold. Tam was south of Shappensay. The sky was grey, just as it had been before. He shook his head. Had he been imagining things? No, he hadn't. For in his hands was the bag the Finman had given him. He looked inside, and saw that it was full of gold coins. Tam was rich. He guided the boat back to Kirkle. Willie had sobered up by this point, and they took their passengers back to Sandy. Once there, Tam went to the inn at the harbour and sat down at the bar. Drinks for everyone, on me, he said, thumping the bag down in the bar. Skies above, said the barman. Where did you get all that money? Tam smiled. From a Finman, he said. Everyone gathered round to listen as Tam told his tale. Some believed him and some didn't, but everyone was willing to accept drinks from him as they listened. The occupants of the inn drank at Tam's pleasure until closing time. The next evening he was back in the inn. More folk had come to hear his tale, and he treated them all. Tam had never had coin to spare before. It felt good to share his wealth around, to show folk how well he'd done for himself. Eventually everyone had heard Tam's tale, but that didn't stop him from telling it. He passed every evening in that inn or another, buying drinks for anyone who would listen to him. By the end of the evening he would be swearing and cursing as men mocked his story of blue cows and Finman. Where did I get this then, eh? He would ask, jingling his bag of coins, which was growing steadily lighter. Eventually no one would speak to Tam, not even if he bought them drinks. His wife and children ignored him. He grew sullen and miserable. When the Lammas Fair came around the next year, he spoke to no one as he steered the boat over to Kirkle. Tam drank alone in the anchor for a while before wandering down the street towards the cathedral. As he walked, he saw someone familiar. It was the Finman. He was facing away from Tam, strolling down the street, but Tam was sure it was him. He ran after the Finman and tapped him on the shoulder. "It's yourself," said Tam. "I thought it was you there." The Finman stared at Tam. "You see me?" he said. "Aye," said Tam with a grin. "It's been a while. How have you been? Did everything work out with that cow?" "You see me?" said the Finman again, reaching into his pocket. "Aye, of course I see you," said Tam. "Well, don't you worry, Tam," said the Finman. As he spoke, he took a tiny wooden box from his pocket and held it up in front of Tam. He opened it up. It was full of a fine powder. "You see me now," he said, "but you won't see me again." The Finman blew sharply on the powder. Tam screamed as it stung his eyes. The Finman spoke the truth. Tam never saw him again. In fact, Tam never saw anything again. From that moment until his dying day, Tam Scott was completely blind. The end. Don't forget to like and subscribe and press the wee bell notification. And a huge big thank you to all my subscribers, patrons and members. See you next week. Bye bye.